Welcome back, everyone. Now, Chapter 3, Traditional Music in the Irish Revival. And I said this was the chapter which caused me to basically trash the structure of the book and write 2 new chapters to set it up properly. And I hope I did something like that. I have a couple of quotes. Adele, you can show that one for another second or two and then show the next one. The first one is from a very sophisticated literary historian named Jeff Learson, who's written a great book there, Remembrance and Imagination, about the 19th century. And the second one is a hero of this segment of the evening. Second quotation is from Francis O'Neill, chief of the Chicago Police Force, collector, chronicler, and we're going to talk about him. But these two lads basically say the same thing in these 2 quotes. And my book questions, as both the collector Francis O'Neill and the cultural historian Jeff Learson have done, the validity of the idea that Irish culture is somehow bifurcated, with one part constantly assimilating and accommodating itself to modern urban and rural life, to the empire in which it found itself, and later to the context of a globalized culture, and another part which never changes and serves as a repository of ancient essence. Traditional music is not the survival of some ancient and timeless manifestation of the essence of Irishness, nor, as some commentators would like to see it, as the shared symptom of a population mysteriously infected by and obsessed with its own, quote, Celtitude, unquote. Irish traditional music did not fortuitously survive from the ancient past in the periphery and on the margins of commercial civilization. Rather, it was enlivened and expanded by the peculiar way in which Irish society responded to the dynamics of the age, the dynamics of the 19th century. It is a modern pursuit that keeps time with the dramatic modernization of Irish society. The trajectory of Irish modernity runs simultaneously with the trajectory of the formation of what we call Irish traditional music as a constellation of forms and practices. What is remarkable about Irish modernity is the way Irish traditional music developed as it unfolded. Irish elites infected with a kind of idealism tend either to ignore or to misdiagnose these developments, often viewing the actual contemporary practice of music, song, and dance by Irish people, and not by non-Irish people, as all too modern. Even today, there persists a false division of Irish music into its outmoded Gaelic past and the unrealized avant-garde to come. A division which ignores the explosive developments in traditional music in both the revolutionary period, as I was talking about there with Robbie Hannan before, and in the period of the Second Industrial Revolution and the cultural revival of the 1890s and afterwards. Obsessed with preserving the past, or alternatively with building towards a utopian future, few recognize that there was something unique and exciting happening in the present which has made Irish music unique and special. Well, maybe we just read Francis O'Neill's quote in 1918, and I didn't need to write that paragraph. The hybrid and fragmented character of the enormous repertoire of ballads and tunes and dances collected in the 19th century threatened the requirement of idealists that the culture should be, in the cultural historian David Lloyd's words, quote, monologic in its modes of expression, unquote. There was a deep distrust among cultural elites of the creativity and inventiveness exhibited within the field of what became known as traditional music in the late 19th and early 20th century. Volumes like Captain Francis O'Neill's massive, it's sitting over here, O'Neill's Music of Ireland, 1,850 melodies, or 1,001 gems, his other collection. These shocked those folks who were bent on paring things down to their essential core. One pundit feared that clever fiddlers might, quote, pawn their creations off on collectors as ancient folk music. Given the Gaelic spirit and the knack of melody construction, Annie Patterson complained at the early part of the 20th century, one could go ahead with this sort of thing ad libitum. But we need to see all this threatening creativity a bit differently, I think. And I'm just going to read 2 passages now. One is the beginning of a section called Global Ireland circa 1880. And the other is a section which offers a contrast, I think, to that, which is about the fate of the pipers in the wake of the Irish famine and the social changes that ensued. Ireland was recovering from the effects of the famine at the same time as the entire Western capitalist economy was stumbling from one expansionary phase to the next. During the so-called Great Depression of the 1870s and 1880s, it appeared to contemporaries that what we now refer to as the First Industrial Revolution had coughed and spluttered its way into the ditch, with the declining prices and profits plaguing industry after industry. In Ireland, the effects of agricultural price movements and bad weather combined to produce serious economic crises in the 1860s and again in the 1870s. At the same time, the liberalization of trade between nations, the innovations in transport on the sea, the penetration of the railroad across the continental Europe and the United States, these had the effect of drawing rural Ireland into an international, if not quite globalized, economy. The cost of producing things, the price of raw materials, of machines, wages, was converging internationally, and the Irish were overall making their contribution to this convergence by specializing in the products their farms produced best and moving in massive numbers to the cities of Britain and America where wages were higher. In the process, overall, the Irish were again becoming better off no matter where they were or what class they came from. And in the 1890s, the global economy finally shifted back into gear. This was the era of tailorization, of the visible hand of scientific management and corporate centralization, of the mass market and its blossoming service sector. This was the age of the bicycle, the vacuum cleaner, the gas cooker, aspirin, the motor car, and the continued commercialization of leisure in the cities of England and America. This was also the age of the mass-produced accordion, fiddle, flute, and concertina. Paolo Soprani had begun to manufacture diatonic accordions near Ancona, Italy in 1863. They became known worldwide as manufacturers along with Hohner and Delappe in the 1870s. The Wheatstone concertina was being surpassed in popularity by the mass production of cheaper instruments by Louis Lachenal and Company from the 1860s. Having lost its upper-class associations by the end of the century, the push-pull Anglo concertina, adapted from German models invented in the middle of the century, became increasingly associated with both urban and rural musical settings throughout England and Ireland. Developments in the design and production of the concert flute for European orchestras caused the dumping of early orchestral flutes. Exhibit A. With outmoded key systems onto second-hand musical markets. They were taken up and adapted by fifers and pipers throughout Ireland and the diaspora. The Irish pipes also underwent important developments at the hands of the Taylor brothers of Drogheda and later Philadelphia. These were eventually heard on Irish stages. A Belfast Gaelic leaguer reported in 1897 hearing in the Grand Opera House here in Belfast a young American, Charles Mack, quote, playing the Irish pipes in a style superior to anything I had previously heard, unquote. Mack's pipes made in America by Taylor, quote, are more extensive in their range and more perfect in their mechanical arrangements than any that were ever made in Ireland. They are of ebony, richly mounted with silver and ivory, the bag being India rubber. And the set comprises the chanter, which has the usual chromatic range of 19 notes on which the melody is played, 4 keyed pipes called regulators giving 17 notes, and the usual 3 drones, so that this little instrument is equal in variety of sounds to an organ of 39 pipes. The report continued that the Taylors had made 10 similar sets, some of which were provided with further mechanical improvements. So, a dynamic age, and an age of explosive opportunity with regard to new instruments and creativity upon them. But the famine itself may have hit this symbolically powerful cohort of pipers that Canon Goodman collected from, for example, and Petrie collected from before the famine, particularly hard. Reg Hall, in his PhD study of late 19th and early 20th century traditional music, suggests that the flute, accompanied by the fiddle, may have come to replace the pipes as the high-status instrument after the famine. As we have seen, pipers and their pipes appear to have been the main target of clerical suppression in the post-famine decades. Revival-era commentators remarked regularly on the fallen status of both pipers and their instrument, the archetypical landless artisanal musician after the famine. Patrick Weston Joyce linked national musical decline to the replacement of the harp by the pipes. Here's a quote from Joyce. "The growth, or as some would call it, the degeneration of Irish music through the various stages of its history was very uneven. The harp music being executed by musicians who had come into close contact with the outside world and were consequently more cultured than the mere pipers and ballad singers, came to maturity much earlier than the more democratic music of the pipes." And this is the kind of typical attitude of the 1890s. The culture of the pipes tended to be viewed as broken and near to extinction by some Gaelic Leaguers, and some even wondered, was it worth saving at all? When they went looking for pipers, activists were as likely to find them in workhouses or travelling the roads, and their instruments either missing or in poor repair. Seamus O'Casaja, an avid collector of information about the pipes, the pipers, and their music and their history in the 1890s, saved a number of photographs of pipers, obviously in this impoverished condition. We have one of them here, this man with his daughter. One of these captures a piper standing on a poorly paved road in front of a thatched cottage. Wearing a hat and trimmed white beard, he stared directly at the camera with bellows bag and chanter strapped around his waist. To his right, a teenage girl of dark complexion with shawl and dress. And attached to this photo is a mimeographed paragraph with the title, "The Blind Harper of County Galway." And I'll just finish this passage with this long quote. "Even in the remotest parts of Ireland, the pipes are seldom heard now. Indeed, one may travel for months without meeting a piper of the real old school. Seldom also are they heard at wedding or country dance where they were wont to form an important item in the programme. Such as do remain of the pipers are but a sorry sample compared with the sprightly musicians associated with song and story in past scenes in Irish life. The subject of our photograph is a well-known character throughout the length and breadth of County Galway, but he gains such a miserable livelihood as would seem to be his share more by begging than by piping some merry tune, and his pipes are as broken in wind as he is in pocket. Yet he is a merry rogue and has doubtless been a good player in his day. Seeking here and there a sheltering roof and a meal, or a few coppers with which to purchase it, his only companion, the child who is fast growing to a woman's estate, but who refuses to leave the side of the old piper, be his lot what it may. He wanders from point to point, the blind piper of Galway, whose playing days are over, and the music of those pipes gone forever." Now, in the photographic evidence, we've a lot of pipers photographed in the 1890s and afterwards, well dressed. With Brendan and I were chatting earlier. Brendan's talking about these Taylor sets of pipes, the Rolls Royce of pipes. But just as many, fell down the social ladder as survived in America to become sort of bourgeois pipers and mates of Captain Francis O'Neill. And it's exciting to see all the characters which come into the public eye and become reported upon in the newspapers of the day once the Gaelic League and the people who are running the Feis-Ceoil Association link up together and find out where they are and organize them to bring them to Dublin. People like Marcin O'Reilly and Dennis Delaney. Is there, Dallas, there's a slide of Dennis Delaney playing for the Feis-Ceoil in front of the phonograph. This is Mickey Cumbaugh O'Sullivan, another one who was brought up from Cork, and a fascinating story. And we find out, hold it there, we'll talk about this fella in a minute. We find out most of what we know. When I was reading these newspaper reports, it was immediately apparent that Francis O'Neill was reading the same newspapers. And he was looking at the same photos in the same newspapers. He must have been sent the newspapers and the reports from the Feis-Ceoil at the time when he was putting together this amazing book, Irish Minstrels and Musicians, which is over here somewhere. Now, I want to introduce my good friend Brendan O'Hare to the proceedings. Because Brendan really introduced me to this book. I think I've had this book for quite some time, but I never really appreciated it at all. Until I moved to Belfast, and until I found Brendan O'Hare in pubs. And we're in Brendan's neighbourhood here. the Redbox Recording Studios have just, are blow-ins really, to this neighborhood. Brendan's been here for quite a long time. 1980. Something.
Yeah, a while.
But we used to play tunes in the Hatfield bar around the corner. And during the time that I talk about this bar, and Breandan talks about this bar and playing tunes in it in my last chapter on traditional music in the Troubles and the peace process. But often it was safer and more fun to go to Breandan's house behind the Hatfield rather than go home on some rainy Saturday nights when you couldn't get a taxi. And one of the rituals in Breandan's house after the pub was to read from the book. This is my copy, and it's in pretty good nick. Breandan's copy, I don't think would make it across the street over here because it's
right there yet.
It's been so well thumbed that it's kind of falling to bits.
It had a few interesting accidents in its life as well.
Yeah,
so.
it is. Well, we won't. We'll go into those. Yeah, we mightn't. Now, I'm looking for
Edward Joyce.
Edward Joyce, yeah. This is Edward Joyce here, up on the screen, and you might see it on the YouTube as well. And this is just many of the stories of pipers that O'Neill collected in this volume of accounts of musicians. Well, we get something of O'Neill's style and the crack we would have picking at random, opening a page at random, and just reading out. We have a particular reason for reading about Edward or Eddie the Kid Joyce. So I won't read all of it, but this is the account of Edward, who incidentally is playing a Taylor set there, which we wrote about and we'll talk about in a minute. So O'Neill writes about Edward Joyce. It is generally conceded that Eddie Joyce, familiarly called the Kid, was the most precocious and in many respects the most remarkable performer on the Union pipes which America has produced. Pipering was in his blood, for not only was James Joyce's father a good piper, but several relatives of his name from County Galway were also good performers on that instrument. It can be safely assumed that much of the facility with which he mastered the intricacies of the Irish chanter were in no small degree attributable to the influence of heredity. You have to have your lips and your tongue in shape to be reading Francis O'Neill. Let me get this sorted. Born at Boston in 1861 and originally taught by his father, Eddie completed his musical education and training under the renowned William Taylor of Philadelphia, a thorough master of his business in every sense of the word. It was the pupil's boast that the suppleness of his fingers enabled him to excel even his teacher in difficult technical execution. In fact, the latter took such a liking to him that he generously assigned many of his engagements to the talented pupil. Undersized and boyish-looking for his age, he soon fell a victim to the blandishments of impressionable females and was caught in the meshes of matrimony while yet still in his teens. Unfortified by this... What are you looking at me for? Unfortified by discretion or determination, I just looked randomly to my left. I'm sorry. I'm not done yet. Unfortified by discretion or determination, the train of evils which follow the footsteps of fame soon undermined a constitution never robust. And at an early age of 19, while playing for the Ivy Leaf Company in Chicago, he was obliged to give up his engagement and go to a hospital for treatment. Now, there's another paragraph about his long convalescence and how well he was looked after and how he adopted fingerless gloves to play, etc. For an Irish piper, his repertory was not comprehensive, being limited to a dozen or so of each variety of Irish airs or tunes, but all of those he could play exceptionally well on the chanter, unaccompanied by the concords of the regulators, which he seldom used. Much as mankind is inclined to condone the failings of this conspicuously endowed with artistic talent, nothing short of reasonable rectitude in our idols will ensure permanent popularity. Having fallen from his pedestal, Eddie Joyce, the erstwhile paragon of pipering, returned to his hometown in shattered health and waning fame. He died in 1897 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Admired for his genius, pitied for his foibles, and lamented for his loss. Young Joyce, the Kid Piper. disappointing the promise of early years, passed away in obscurity like a meteor in its fall. His fine instrument, made for him specially by Taylor, his teacher, was sold to Billy McCormick of Chicago in 1897 to defray the funeral expenses.
Kind of sad. Really.
Kind of sad, yeah. But we have another reason for reading this out, and it has to do with
Billy McCormick.
Billy McCormick.
Because there was a Billy McCormick from Belfast who played the pipes as well. He was originally from Carrickfergus, good man, Jay. And but he lived up in Belfast, and Billy was learning or playing away on a practice set, and he went down to busk in Dublin one weekend, and he was busking in the street, and a nun was going past, and she put £5 in his box. And £5 at the time, this has been the late 70s. It was a fair bit of money. And Billy was a wild, civil sort of a fella, and genuine sort of a boy, and he thought that this was a bit too much, the poor nun giving him a favour. So he got up and run after her with the favour and said, "There is much, this is too much, sister, you know." And she went, "No, you keep it. I love the music, I was standing and listening to you." And she says, "What's your name?" And he goes, "Billy McCormick." And she nearly had a heart attack. And she then informed him that her father was Billy McCormick and her grandfather was Billy McCormick from Chicago, and that she had his pipes and would send them to Billy McCormick, now living in Belfast. And Billy gave her his name and address, thought no more about it, told everybody this really funny story when he came back from his weekend in Dublin. But about 6 months later, he got contacted to say that there was a parcel for him at the international airport here in Belfast, and he went up to collect that set of pipes. Quite amazing. And the interesting thing is, because I found this book in the library in school whenever I was about 12 or 13. I just became completely fascinated with, one, the images that are captured in it, and then I started to read biographies that he wrote and found them quite fascinating as well. And Billy arrived down, I was working with Robbie Hughes, the pipe maker at the time, and Billy arrived down to get some work done on the pipes. And he told me this story, and there was something about this Billy McCormick story that stuck in my head. And I went home, and sure enough, when I hoped it out, there it was, that Billy McCormick had bought the Kid Piper's pipes to bury him, and now our Billy McCormick had them.
Yeah.
So it was unbelievable to have looked at those pictures and then some 90 years later actually put your hand on the instrument, and it was quite an interesting thing to be at.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah. Listen, the other fascination we both have is sight reading tunes and learning them out of O'Neill's book.
Yeah.
And
Or any book.
Or any book. But we picked two here. I picked one and you picked the other. And you picked one and I picked the other. So we'll have a go at Sergeant Early's Dream.
Yep.
And Captain Bing.
Captain Bing. Yeah.
Anything to say about that?
Well, Sergeant Early was a big mate of O'Neill, and he worked in the police force as well. And the interesting thing is that this tune is a well-known tune, but it'd be played in a lower key, usually by fiddle players. And it's written in this key in the book because Early played the pipes, and he would have been able to play it in this key and wouldn't have been able to play it in the key that it's more commonly known in, if you sort of get me drift.
of the kind of ideological snits people got themselves into in the 1890s was, as I said, the proliferation of tunes and of songs, and the loss of the ancient pure stuff in the mix, but also all of these new instruments that were coming in. To give you an idea about it, it's predominantly an opposition to the melodeon and the concertina. So I've surrounded myself with concertina players, and let's have just a couple of these quotes. Here's George O'Neill in the Irish Ecclesiastical Record in 1900. It's amazing how completely, even in many remote villages and county districts, the London music hall ditty and the melodeon have taken place of anything national in tune or instrument. Concerning the lamentations about the passing of the old pipers and the substitution of all kinds of foreign instrumental music for minstrelsy of our ancient bards, Francis O'Neill commented, "Too true, the old music must give way to the new, but what blessings has change brought to Ireland? Mainly monotony and melodeons in Germany." When we estimate the character of the members of the program committee, we may reasonably expect something like the following at the festival. Part 3 of the competitions, melodeon competition organized in order to make this national instrument more popular. Dr. Culrick has written a concerto for this instrument in which there are no sharps or flats. The player who is able to play it wins the prize, which is the copyright to the aforesaid concerto and various things. Poor Culwick. Anyway, there are quite a few more of these kind of anti-concertina and anti-melodeon types of arguments.
Yes.
And what we've been discussing is that maybe it's the instruments themselves and the development of the instruments and the manufacture of them, which is more to blame than what's being done with them.
Yeah. A lot of the early instruments were really one step up from a toy, basically, and it's said that at times they wouldn't last one session because they'd literally come apart in the player's hands. And of course the action, which is the buttons and levers that make everything work, were very poorly made and therefore not very responsive. And that probably contributed a lot to people going, the instruments were fairly lumpy and the music coming out of them was probably just as lumpy as the way they were made. But then, whenever the Anglo concertina really took off, the English makers started to make them, and of course they started to perfect them, and the action and all was so much more responsive, and it allowed the concertina players to start to reproduce the same sort of things that fiddles and pipes were doing, and obviously the quality of the music went up along with the quality of the instruments.
Yeah. You've made one of these instruments.
Yes.
And your daughter has it in her lap there.
Yeah.
And is she going to play a tune? Is she going to come and sit in my seat?
No, well, you might swap with me and I'll get out of the way. And I'm supposed to leave that behind me.
Right, okay. Please welcome Thalia. Thalia O'Hare and her teacher Una Monaghan. You going to play a tune for us? Thalia. We have Lorraine Bhriain with us as well. Lorraine, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Lorraine, you're from Ennis, or near to Ennis?
Just outside Ennis, a
And-
village called Tuna in County Clare.
Yeah. And these days, Clare and Ennis is... it's regarded as centre of the universe almost for concertina playing, would you think?
Yeah, Clare in general has always been very popular for concertinas. There's always been concertinas there. Even I noticed it more when I moved away from the county. For the first time, I had people coming up to me saying, "What's that? You know, what is it?" Whereas you wouldn't get that in Clare.
Right.
Everyone would know
Yeah.
what it is. I think I was introduced on stage to a concert in Buncrana, and they introduced the instrument as well as me. This is a concertina,
Right.
and which was a first for me.
Yeah. It seems to have, I mean, I still don't know the full story of this transition from this foreign body polluting traditional music to something which we all regard as like at the heart of matters now, I mean, it must have happened in Clare earlier than elsewhere.
I think what I understand is that it was quite widespread around Ireland from the 1870s maybe onwards, and then once we kind of got to the 1830s, music kind of fizzled out, and we had the famine, and there was less documentation. And I think it was more that it was preserved in Clare rather than it wasn't that it was just in Clare. I think it was maybe preserved there, and then in the 1960s we had the revival and it came back again. I think there was always a few players like Elizabeth Crotty and West Clare and Paddy Murphy and Junior Crehan and players like that that maybe preserved it, and Chris Droney as well. But the first actual recording of a concertina player was a man from Mullen, so it was all over
That's
Ireland.
right. Mullally,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, listen, I wonder, is Una going to make it back with her concertina repaired by Brendan O'Hara, no doubt?
Yay!
Yes?
That's a positive sign.
Well, we'll finish off this segment now with a couple of tunes from Una and Lorraine, whom I have introduced to each other. Thank you very much for this. And don't all come around this. thanks to Dónal O'Connor on the keyboards there. 2 concertinas and piano, once intrusive and foreign, but now just right. Thanks very much, ladies. Thanks very much.